How do you find your own voice? Do you find it in the doing, in the preaching, or are there ways that we can kind of discover our own unique instrument?
I think you discover it in the doing. In the doing. I've turned some corners in trying to find a way to do it. As you may have noticed, I'm short. I have a weak voice, don't have high energy level, not full of excitement and all the things that go with it. All the preachers I listened to growing up in the church were full of thunder and lightning. All of them were 9 feet tall and loud and energetic. And then I sound like the wind whistling through a splinter on a post. And I just thought, how can I compensate for what I don't have? So I built a lot of detours and developed some compensations. But in the course of it, I found that people heard me. They heard what I said and wanted to talk about it more. Or could you suggest something I could read? Then I knew that I was communicating. I have never wanted to be a great speaker. I just wanted to be heard in the literal sense and symbolic sense. But you find that in doing, like Albert Schweitzer said, the way you get to know Jesus is by following him. I think it's true in preaching.
Should there be a distinction between the pastor's personal spiritual life and their sermon preparation, or should sermon preparation be a spiritual discipline?
I think sermon preparation is a spiritual discipline. When I began, my devotional life, whatever I read, biblical or otherwise, was one thing. My study was something else. And then Rabbi Silverman told me once at Vanderbilt, an hour at study is in the sight of the Holy One, blessed be He, as an hour of prayer. And I discovered that my study was drawing me closer to the message and to the heart of God than this little devotional book I had that didn't have 9 calories in the whole thing. And I discovered through experience the blending of my devotional life and my study life so that they're essentially the same anymore. Yeah.
You've talked a little bit about this in some of your answers, but do you have particular sermon preparation methods that you would advocate?
Well, I have 2 basic stages of operation. One is getting something to say. I'm not getting up a sermon, I'm getting a message, which I hope I can state by the end of my preparation in one clear, positive sentence. And then the second stage is to make what I have discovered into a sermon. And that calls a little art and craft. But the first part is just deadly research, getting something to say. Now, when young ministers start out, for instance, you see a young minister in the library, books open all around. What are you doing? I'm getting up a sermon. No. Find something to say, well-researched, and when you know clearly what you want to say, then begin to work on a sermon. And let a little time lapse in between the rough sketch of what I want to say and the way I'm going to say it. And I do that still after all these years.
Obviously, pastors can be very busy people. There can be surprises during the week. So if a preacher is really up against a deadline in their preparation for a sermon, what do you suggest if they haven't had time to really prepare as they'd like to?
Well, that's a common experience, I think, but not as common as many ministers would think. I very seldom meet a minister who doesn't have time. He may have 9 funerals and 14 weddings that week. Now, that's exceptional. But most of the time when we don't have enough time to get a sermon this week because I've been so busy, is I probably am not well organized and well disciplined. But let's give the benefit of the doubt. 2 things could be done. Several. One is say to the people, I have been busy. As you know, we've had this and this and this and this. And instead of wasting your time, what I would like to do is to read to you a sermon on the subject that I wanted to deal with, preached by Harry Emerson Fosdick 35 years ago. I think you'll find it appropriate. Just be honest. Secondly, drag out an older sermon that you could nurse a little bit, manipulate, bring it back to life. And you may want to tell them that's what you did. Or you may stand up and read scripture and some appropriate poetry or this and that. But I think you can, even at the last minute, prepare something appropriate and effective to say, because you've been well disciplined and you've been preparing sermons week by week for years. You have a reservoir. You have something you can draw on. You can think of something to say, and it'll be a pretty good sermon. In fact, somebody will say, that's your best one yet. And don't believe them. Don't believe them, otherwise you'll be in the barrel every week. But there's a lot of truth to it. If you have a reservoir and something is coming like Sunday morning and this is happening in the church, it'll be a magnet. It'll pull it out and you'll be more ready. You may feel inadequate, but for the ear of the listener, you're more than adequate. I would trust that to be the case.